Kate always loved rainy days at her bookstore. The gentle patter of raindrops against the windows created a cozy atmosphere that seemed to draw in the most interesting customers. On this particular Tuesday afternoon, as the sky darkened and rain began to pour, she was arranging a new display of romance novels when the bell above the door jingled. She looked up to see a man rushing in, shaking water from his dark hair. He carried a leather camera bag over his shoulder, now spotted with raindrops. Their eyes met briefly before he smiled apologetically. "Sorry about the puddle," he said, gesturing to the small pool of water forming beneath his shoes. Kate waved dismissively. "Don't worry about it. That's what happens when it rains." She reached behind the counter and handed him a small towel she kept for such occasions. "Here, for your bag." "Thanks. You're a lifesaver." He carefully dried his camera bag. "I'm Jack, by the way." "Kate," she replied, noticing how his blue eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. As Jack browsed through the shelves, Kate couldn't help stealing glances at him. His hands moved with care as he pulled books out, read their backs, and returned them to their places. He had a photographer's attention to detail, she thought. "Do you own this place?" Jack asked, approaching the counter with a book on classic photography. Kate nodded. "For 3 years now. Before that, I worked here for the previous owner. It feels special, not like the big chain stores." Jack ran his fingers along the worn wooden counter. "Places like this are getting rare." Kate felt a warmth spread through her chest at his appreciation. Most people didn't notice the care she put into creating the right atmosphere. "What brings you out in this weather?" she asked. Jack held up his camera bag. "I was photographing the old bridge when the storm hit. Wasn't expecting it to come so quickly." Their conversation flowed easily as the rain continued outside. Jack told her about his work as a photography teacher at the local community college. Kate shared stories about interesting customers and her favorite books. Time seemed to slow as they talked, the bookstore creating an intimate bubble around them. When Jack mentioned his love for classic literature, Kate's eyes lit up. She led him to a special section at the back of the store where she kept first editions and rare finds. "This is my favorite part of the store," she admitted. "Not many people appreciate these anymore." Jack carefully opened a vintage copy of Great Expectations and inhaled its scent. "There's nothing like the smell of old books." Kate felt her heart beat faster watching his genuine appreciation. Their hands brushed as she showed him another book, and she felt a small electric shock at the contact. She quickly pulled away, but noticed Jack's lingering gaze. As the rain began to ease, customers started trickling in, breaking their private moment. Kate returned to her duties, helping people find books while Jack continued browsing. Later, as he approached the counter to pay for the photography book, their eyes met again. This time, Kate felt something deeper in his gaze. "I'm having an exhibition of my work next Friday at the Riverside Gallery," Jack said, his voice slightly hesitant. "Nothing fancy, just some photos I took during my travels. Would you like to come?" Kate felt her cheeks warm. I don't know much about photography." "That's even better. I'd love a fresh perspective." He wrote the details on the back of a bookmark and slid it across the counter. "No pressure, but I'd really like to see you there." After he left, Kate found herself holding the bookmark, tracing his handwriting with her finger. She hadn't felt this way about anyone since her relationship with Tom ended 2 years ago. The thought of starting something new both thrilled and terrified her. As she closed the shop that evening, the bookmark safely tucked in her wallet, Kate wondered what would happen if she said yes to this unexpected invitation. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets glistening under the emerging sunset. Perhaps, like the weather, it was time for a change. Kate stared at herself in the mirror, trying on her third outfit of the evening. The gallery opening was in an hour, and she still couldn't decide if she should even go. Jack's invitation had occupied her thoughts all week, making it hard to focus on work or anything else. "You're overthinking this," Emma said from Kate's bed, where she lounged with a glass of wine. "It's just an art show, not a marriage proposal." Kate sighed, smoothing down the simple black dress she had finally settled on. "I know. It's just been so long since I've felt interested in someone." "Exactly why you should go," Emma replied, standing up to adjust Kate's necklace. "Tom's been gone for 2 years. It's time you stopped hiding in that bookstore." Kate knew her friend was right. After her breakup with Tom, she had thrown herself into her work, using books as an escape from real connection, but something about Jack felt different. The way he looked at her books, how carefully he listened when she spoke. What if he's not actually interested in me? Kate asked, voicing her deepest fear. Maybe he just wants to sell more tickets to his exhibition. Emma rolled her eyes. The way you described how he looked at you? Trust me, he's interested. An hour later, Kate stood outside the Riverside Gallery, gathering her courage. Through the windows, she could see a modest crowd mingling among large photographs. She almost turned to leave when she spotted Jack inside, talking animatedly to an older couple. He wore a navy button-up shirt that made his eyes appear even bluer from a distance. Before Kate could change her mind, Jack looked up and saw her. His face broke into a wide smile that made her stomach flutter. He excused himself and made his way to the door. You came, he said, his voice warm with genuine pleasure. I wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't, Kate admitted, immediately regretting her honesty. Jack laughed. I'm glad you changed your mind. He gently touched her elbow, guiding her inside. Let me show you around. The exhibition was called Hidden Corners, featuring photographs of overlooked places from around the world. Kate found herself drawn into Jack's vision: a worn staircase in Paris, an elderly couple on a bench in Barcelona, morning light filtering through a window in some remote village. This one's my favorite, Jack said, stopping before a photo of an ancient bookstore in Rome. Books were stacked from floor to ceiling, with a single shaft of light illuminating the dust particles in the air. It reminds me of your shop, he added softly, places that hold stories within stories. Kate felt her chest tighten at the connection he'd made. It's beautiful, she whispered, not just talking about the photograph. As they moved through the exhibition, Jack's hand occasionally brushed against the small of her back, each touch sending warmth through her body. He introduced her to colleagues and friends, his pride evident when he mentioned her bookstore. Later, as the crowd thinned, Jack offered to walk her home. The night air was cool, and Kate found herself walking closer to him than necessary, drawn to his warmth. Thank you for coming tonight, Jack said as they approached her apartment building. Having you there meant a lot to me. Kate looked up at him, noticing how the streetlight caught the angles of his face. Your work is amazing, you see things most people would miss. That's what drew me to you, I think, Jack said, his voice lower now. You notice things too. The way you arrange books, how you remember what your customers like to read. They stopped at her door, neither wanting the evening to end. When Jack leaned in, Kate felt her breath catch. His lips were soft against hers, the kiss gentle at first, then deepening as she responded. His hand cupped her face, fingers tangling in her hair. When they finally pulled apart, Kate felt dizzy with want. Jack rested his forehead against hers, his breathing uneven. I've been wanting to do that since I walked into your shop, he confessed. Kate smiled, her earlier doubts fading away. Would you like to come up for coffee? Jack's eyes darkened with desire, but he shook his head. I want to do this right. How about dinner tomorrow night? As Kate watched him walk away after another lingering kiss, she felt something long dormant awakening inside her. For the first time in years, she was excited about what tomorrow might bring. 3 weeks had passed since their first date, and Kate found herself thinking about Jack at the most unexpected moments. Like now, as she shelved new arrivals, her mind wandered to their dinner last night. How his fingers had intertwined with hers across the table, how his eyes had crinkled when she made him laugh. The bell above the door chimed, pulling Kate from her thoughts. Jack walked in carrying 2 coffee cups and wearing the leather jacket she loved. Her heart beat faster as he approached. Thought you might need this, he said, placing a vanilla latte on the counter. You mentioned you were doing inventory today. You're a lifesaver, Kate replied, taking a sip. The warmth spread through her chest, much like the feeling she got whenever he was near. How did your morning class go? The usual. Half the students passionate about photography, the other half just looking for an easy credit. Jack leaned across the counter, close enough that Kate could smell his cologne, something woody and subtle that made her want to move closer. But I'm more interested in our plans for tonight. Kate felt heat rise to her cheeks. They had been taking things slow, their evenings together ending with increasingly passionate kisses at her door, but nothing more. Tonight would be different. She had invited him over for dinner at her apartment. Still on for 7? She asked, trying to sound casual despite the butterflies in her stomach. I wouldn't miss it. Jack reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her skin. "I've been thinking about it all day." The hours crawled by after Jack left. Kate closed the store early, rushing home to prepare. She changed the sheets on her bed, then felt silly for being so presumptuous. But as she chopped vegetables for dinner, she admitted to herself what she truly wanted. It had been so long since she'd been intimate with someone, and the desire she felt for Jack was becoming harder to ignore. At precisely 7, there was a knock at her door. Jack stood there with a bottle of wine and a small bouquet of wildflowers. "These reminded me of the ones in that meadow photo I showed you," he explained as she invited him in. Dinner was comfortable yet charged with anticipation. It talked about books he was reading, about Kate's dream to write her own novel someday. With each glass of wine, they moved closer on her small couch, until Kate was practically nestled against his side. "I've never met anyone who listens the way you do," she said, noticing how intently he focused when she spoke. "I've never met anyone worth listening to like this," he responded, his voice lower than usual. When Jack leaned in to kiss her, Kate met him halfway. Unlike their previous goodnight kisses, this one had no endpoint in sight. His hand slid up her back, pulling her closer as her fingers tangled in his hair. The kiss deepened, and Kate felt herself melting against him, all her previous hesitation evaporating. Jack pulled back slightly, his breathing uneven. "Kate," he whispered against her lips, "I don't want to rush you." In response, Kate stood up and took his hand, leading him toward her bedroom. The nervousness she had felt earlier transformed into certainty. This felt right, he felt right. In her bedroom, moonlight filtered through the curtains, casting everything in a silver glow. Jack's hands were gentle as they undressed each other, his eyes never leaving hers, asking silent permission with each new area of skin exposed. "You're beautiful," he murmured as he laid her down on the bed, his body covering hers. Their movements started slow and tender, learning each other's bodies, discovering what brought sighs and gasps. Kate arched against him as his lips traced her collarbone, down to her breast. His touch was both reverent and passionate, lighting fires everywhere his fingers trailed. When they finally came together, Kate felt something she hadn't expected. Not just physical pleasure, but a profound connection. Jack whispered her name like a prayer as they moved together, their rhythms matching perfectly, building towards something overwhelming. Afterward, lying in his arms with her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat slow, Kate felt a contentment she had almost forgotten existed. Jack's fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "What are you thinking?" he asked softly. Kate smiled against his skin. "That I wish you didn't have to leave." Jack tightened his arms around her. "Then I won't," he promised, kissing the top of her head. "Not tonight." As Kate drifted toward sleep, wrapped in Jack's warmth, she realized that for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of what she was feeling. Whatever this was becoming, she was ready to embrace it fully. The weeks that followed were the happiest Kate could remember. Her bookstore seemed brighter somehow, and customers commented on her constant smile. Jack spent most nights at her apartment now, but they still maintained their separate spaces. It was a delicate balance of growing closer while honoring their independent lives. One Tuesday afternoon, Kate decided to surprise Jack at the college where he taught. She had picked up a special edition photography book she knew he'd love and thought it would be nice to take him to lunch. As she approached the arts building, excitement bubbled in her chest. Kate hadn't been inside the college before and found herself admiring the student artwork lining the hallways as she searched for Jack's classroom. She heard his voice before she saw him, that warm tone she'd grown to love. Turning the corner, she stopped abruptly. Through the open door, she could see Jack sitting on his desk, leaning down to look at something a woman was showing him on her phone. The woman was stunning, tall with sleek dark hair, and an elegant style that made Kate suddenly aware of her simple jeans and sweater. Jack's hand rested on the woman's shoulder as they laughed together, their heads close. A cold feeling spread through Kate's stomach. She stepped back, not wanting to be seen. The woman placed her hand over Jack's, squeezing it affectionately. They looked comfortable together, familiar in a way that spoke of history. Kate turned and hurried back down the hallway, the book clutched to her chest. Outside, she gulped fresh air, trying to calm her racing thoughts. She hadn't expected this sharp pain, this immediate sense of betrayal. She avoided Jack's calls that evening, sending a brief text that she wasn't feeling well and needed rest. The next day was the same. By the third day, her phone was filled with increasingly worried messages from him. "Kate, please talk to me. I don't understand what's happened. At least tell me if you're okay. I'm worried about you. I'm coming to the bookstore tomorrow if I don't hear from you." Emma came by with wine and sympathy after hearing Kate's tearful explanation. "You need to talk to him," Emma insisted, pouring another glass. "You don't even know who that woman is." "I know what I saw," Kate replied stubbornly. "The way they touched each other. They have history." "And you and Jack don't?" Emma raised an eyebrow. 6 weeks of amazing connection doesn't deserve at least a conversation. Deep down, Kate knew her reaction came from old wounds. Tom had ended things suddenly, revealing he'd reconnected with an ex-girlfriend. Kate had been blindsided then, and seeing Jack with that woman had triggered all those old feelings of inadequacy. The next morning, Jack appeared at the bookstore just as she was opening. His hair was disheveled, dark circles under his eyes suggesting he hadn't slept well. "Kate," he said simply, his voice hoarse. "Please talk to me." She let him in but kept the store closed, turning the sign to "back in 15 minutes. "I saw you with her," Kate said, the words rushing out before she could stop them. "At your classroom. The beautiful woman with the dark hair. You looked close." Understanding dawned on Jack's face, followed quickly by relief. "Lisa? You saw me with Lisa?" "I don't care what her name is," Kate said, fighting back tears. I can't do this again, Jack. I can't be with someone who isn't completely." "She's my sister," Jack interrupted gently. "My sister who just moved back from Italy last week, the one I've been telling you about." Kate froze, her prepared speech evaporating. "Your sister?" Jack pulled out his phone, opening his photos to show a family picture. Jack with his arm around the same woman, both of them flanked by older people who were clearly their parents. "Lisa surprised me at work that day. She's going through a divorce and needed advice about selling their shared property in Rome. That's probably what you saw us discussing." Kate felt heat rise to her face, embarrassment replacing her anger. "Why didn't you tell me she was in town?" "I was planning to introduce you this weekend," Jack said, stepping closer. "She's been staying with me, which is why I've been at your place even more lately." The realization of how badly she'd misjudged the situation hit Kate hard. "I feel so stupid," she whispered. Jack gently lifted her chin. "You're not stupid. But next time, please talk to me instead of shutting me out." He brushed a tear from her cheek. "I missed you so much these past few days." As his lips met hers, Kate felt the wall she'd hastily constructed crumbling away. Relief and lingering shame mingled as she clung to him, promising herself she would work harder to trust what they were building together. Kate insisted on cooking dinner for Jack and Lisa that weekend, determined to make a good impression after her embarrassing misunderstanding. She spent the afternoon preparing Jack's favorite pasta dish, checking and rechecking that everything was perfect. "You're overthinking this," Jack assured her, wrapping his arms around her waist as she fussed with the table setting. "Lisa will love you because I love you." The words hung in the air between them. Jack had never said those 3 words before, and from the look on his face, he hadn't planned to say them like this. Kate felt her heart skip. "You love me?" she asked softly, turning in his arms to face him. Jack's expression was vulnerable, open in a way that made her breath catch. "I do. I've known for weeks, just wasn't sure when to tell you." Kate reached up to touch his face. "I love you too." Their kiss was interrupted by a knock at the door. Lisa arrived carrying wine and flowers, her smile warm and genuine as she hugged Kate. "Finally. Jack hasn't stopped talking about you," Lisa said, her voice carrying the slight Italian accent she picked up during her years abroad. "I was beginning to think he was making you up." Dinner was filled with laughter as Lisa shared embarrassing stories about Jack's childhood, and Kate found herself genuinely liking this woman she'd been so jealous of days earlier. After Lisa left, promising to meet for coffee soon, Jack pulled Kate close on the couch. "That went well," he murmured, kissing her neck in a way that made it hard for her to concentrate. "She's lovely," Kate agreed, tilting her head to give him better access. "I feel even worse now about assuming." Jack silenced her with a kiss. "No more of that, it's forgotten." His hands slipped under her blouse, warm against her skin. Kate felt the familiar heat building between them, more intense somehow after their brief separation and the emotional revelations of the evening. When he picked her up, carrying her to the bedroom, she wrapped her legs around his waist, already impatient for the feel of his skin against hers. Their lovemaking that night had a new dimension, both tender and urgent, punctuated by whispered "I love yous" that made everything more intense. Kate felt herself completely surrendering to the moment, to the sensation of Jack moving above her, within her, his eyes never leaving hers. Afterward, tangled in sheets and each other, Jack traced patterns on her bare shoulder. "I have something to ask you," he said, his voice serious enough that Kate propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "What is it?" "I've been offered an opportunity to photograph a series of historic libraries across Europe. 3 months, 6 countries." Kate felt her stomach drop. "When would you leave?" "Next month." "But Kate," he sat up, taking her hands in his. "I want you to come with me." She blinked, certain she'd misheard. "What about the bookstore?" "I can't just leave for 3 months. You mentioned Emma's been looking for more responsibility. This could be her chance to manage while you're gone." His eyes were bright with excitement. "Think about it. All those amazing bookshops, the inspiration for your writing. We could work together, your words, my photos." The idea was both terrifying and exhilarating. Kate had never done anything so spontaneous, had built her life around stability and routine after the chaos of her breakup with Tom. "I don't know, Jack. It's a huge decision." He nodded, pulling her close again. "I know. And I'll respect whatever you decide. If you stay, I'll come back to you. But I think we could create something beautiful together." Over the next week, the idea took root in Kate's imagination. Emma was enthusiastic when Kate tentatively mentioned the possibility, insisting she could handle the store. Kate found herself researching the cities they would visit, imagining walking cobblestone streets hand in hand with Jack. One evening, she closed the store early and went to Jack's apartment, butterflies dancing in her stomach. He opened the door, surprise evident on his face. "I wasn't expecting you tonight," he said, pulling her inside for a kiss. Kate took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about Europe." Hope flickered across his features. "And?" "I want to go," she said, the words bringing a sense of lightness she hadn't expected. "I want the adventure, with you." Jack's face broke into a brilliant smile as he lifted her off her feet, spinning her in a circle. As his lips found hers, Kate knew she was making the right choice. For the first time in her life, she was choosing the unknown, choosing passion over safety. And in Jack's arms, it felt like coming home. Kate had never seen anything as magnificent as the ancient library in Prague. Towering bookshelves stretched toward ornate ceilings, and the scent of old paper and wood polish filled the air. 2 months into their European journey, and each location still took her breath away. "What do you think?" Jack whispered, coming up behind her. His warm hands settled on her waist as he pressed a kiss to her neck. "It's perfect," she murmured, leaning back against his chest. "I can feel the stories in the air." Jack chuckled softly. "That's exactly what I want to capture." He lifted his camera, framing a shot of sunlight streaming through stained glass onto centuries-old books. Their collaboration had evolved naturally. While Jack photographed the libraries, Kate interviewed librarians and wrote about the history and hidden treasures of each location. A travel magazine had already expressed interest in their joint project, something neither had expected when they began. Later that evening, they returned to their small rented apartment overlooking a quiet courtyard. Kate sat at the window, typing notes while Jack uploaded the day's photographs. The comfortable silence between them was occasionally broken by Jack calling her over to see a particularly good shot or Kate reading aloud a passage she was especially proud of. "We make a good team," Jack said, pulling her away from her laptop and onto his lap. His hands slipped under her sweater, warm against her skin. "The best," Kate agreed, kissing him deeply. Her fingers tangled in his hair, which had grown longer during their travels. They didn't make it to the bedroom. Clothes were discarded quickly as they moved to the couch, desire overtaking them as it often did. There was something about creating together that always led to this passionate urgency. Kate straddled Jack, gasping as he pulled her down onto him. His hands guided her hips as they moved together, her body arching as he brought her closer to the edge. Later, wrapped in a blanket and watching the lights of Prague through the window, Kate felt a profound contentment. What had started as a terrifying leap of faith had become the most transformative experience of her life. Not just the travel, but the relationship they were building, equal parts passion, respect, and creative partnership. "I've been thinking," Jack said, his fingers tracing lazy circles on her bare shoulder. "What happens when we go back home?" Kate turned to face him, suddenly apprehensive. "What do you mean?" "My apartment lease is up next month. Seems silly to renew it when I spend every night at your place anyway." Kate's heart raced as she realized what he was suggesting. "Are you asking to move in with me?" "I'm asking if you want to find a new place together," Jack clarified. "Something that would be ours from the beginning, maybe with space for a darkroom for me and a proper writing desk for you." The idea of creating a home together made Kate's chest tight with emotion. This was so different from her relationship with Tom, where she had always felt like a visitor in his space, never quite belonging. "I'd love that," she said, watching the relief and joy spread across Jack's face. As they drifted off to sleep that night, Kate thought about how far she had come from the cautious bookstore owner who had been afraid to trust her feelings. Jack had not only awakened her passion but had shown her how to be brave. Their final stop was Venice, where medieval manuscripts and floating bookshops awaited. On their last evening, they took a gondola through quiet canals, away from the tourist areas. The setting sun painted the ancient buildings in gold and pink as Jack held her close. "I've been saving this one," he said, pulling out a small leather journal from his pocket. "For you." Kate opened it to find blank pages except for a note on the first page in Jack's handwriting. "For the next chapter of our story. I thought you could use it for your novel," he explained. "The one you've been talking about writing for years." Tears pricked at Kate's eyes. No one had ever believed in her dreams so completely, had pushed her to pursue what she really wanted. "Thank you," she whispered, kissing him softly, "for everything." As the gondola glided through the waterways of Venice, Kate thought about the novel taking shape in her mind, a story of taking chances, of finding love when least expected. She had all the inspiration she needed right beside her, in the man who had taught her that the greatest stories came from having the courage to turn the page. 1 year after their return from Europe, Kate sat at her writing desk, fingers hovering over her keyboard. Outside the window of their new home, autumn leaves drifted down from the trees. The final chapter of her novel was proving difficult to finish, not because she didn't know what to write, but because ending it felt like saying goodbye to characters who had become real to her. "Still stuck?" Jack asked, placing a mug of coffee beside her. He bent to kiss her shoulder, his touch as electric as it had been from the beginning. "Not stuck exactly," Kate replied, leaning into his warmth. "Just not ready to let go." Jack smiled against her skin. "You know what might help? A break." His hands slid down her arms, gently pulling her up from the chair. Kate turned in his embrace, noticing he was dressed for going out, camera bag already slung over his shoulder. "Where are we going?" she asked, curious about the mischievous glint in his eyes. "It's a surprise. Dress warm." An hour later, Jack parked their car near the old bridge, the same one he had been photographing the rainy day they first met. The area looked different now, trees aflame with fall colors, the river running clear and bright beneath the arching stonework. "Remember this place?" Jack asked, taking her hand as they walked along the riverbank. "How could I forget? You came into my shop soaking wet after shooting here." Jack led her to the center of the bridge, where they stopped to look out over the water. The late afternoon sun glinted off the surface, creating patterns of light and shadow that Kate knew Jack would normally be photographing. Instead, he turned to face her. "This spot has always been special to me," he said, his voice slightly unsteady. "Even before I met you. There's something about the way the light hits the water, how the old and new parts of town connect here." Kate nodded, sensing something important in his words. "But now it means so much more," he continued, taking both her hands in his. "Because if it hadn't been raining that day, if I hadn't needed shelter, I might never have walked into your bookstore." Kate felt her heart begin to race as Jack reached into his pocket. When he lowered himself to one knee, the world seemed to slow around them. "Kate," he said, opening a small velvet box to reveal a ring with a vintage setting, a sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds. "You changed everything for me. You taught me what it means to truly see someone, to love every layer of them. Will you marry me?" Tears blurred her vision as joy swept through her body. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes." Jack's hands trembled slightly as he slipped the ring onto her finger. When he stood, Kate threw her arms around him, their kiss deepening as passing cars honked in celebration. That night, they made love with a new intensity, their bodies moving together with the familiarity of countless intimate moments and the excitement of their future promise. Jack's hands and lips traced every curve of her body as if memorizing her all over again. Kate arched beneath him, whispering his name like a prayer as they moved together toward release. Afterward, lying in the tangle of sheets, Kate studied her ring in the moonlight filtering through their bedroom window. "It was my grandmother's," Jack explained, his voice soft in the darkness. "The stone reminded me of your eyes." Kate curled closer into his side, overwhelmed by how perfectly everything had fallen into place. Her novel was nearly finished, with a publisher already interested. Their collaborative book of photographs and essays about Europe's historic libraries had been published to critical acclaim. And now this, a promise of forever with the man who had helped her rediscover her courage. "When did you know?" she asked, tracing patterns on his chest. "That I was the one you wanted to marry?" Jack thought for a moment, his fingers trailing through her hair. "Remember that first night you stayed over at my old apartment? You fell asleep reading, with your glasses still on. I took them off and you smiled in your sleep. That's when I knew I wanted to see that smile every day for the rest of my life." Kate closed her eyes, savoring the memory and the warmth of his confession. Tomorrow she would call Emma and her parents with the news. Tomorrow they would begin planning their wedding and their shared future, but tonight belonged just to them, to this perfect moment of connection that had started with a rainstorm and a chance encounter in a small bookstore. As she drifted toward sleep in Jack's arms, Kate thought about the final chapter of her novel, suddenly knowing exactly how it needed to end, not with goodbye but with a beginning, just like their own story, which was still being written, one page at a time.